The lowly priest only wanted to be close to the woman he loved, but the novel's destined male lead had to forcefully intervene. The man took the woman's hand, leaving no room for refusal, earnestly suggesting he might be a suitable groom. Meanwhile, his fiancée was already going mad with jealousy in a corner. Crane could only pray silently that this time she wouldn't be burned to death. Her name is Crane Hire, the female protagonist of a romance novel. To be with her beloved male lead, she resolutely broke off the engagement with her despicable fiancé. As a lord's daughter, she willingly became the maid of a wealthy young lady. After enduring endless torment, she finally found true love. However, what awaited her in the final chapter of the book was not a happy ending, but being murdered with a cup of poisoned wine. The moment she awoke from her painful struggle, she entered a death loop. The first time she fell in love with the male lead, she died by strangulation. The second time she fell in love with the male lead, she drowned. After that came fire and falling from a building. Eventually, it didn't matter who she chose to be with, or if she avoided entanglement with anyone at all. The outcome never changed. Every rebirth began in a muddy courtyard, with a coin in her mouth. She returned to her 17th coming-of-age ceremony for the 100th time, the very starting point of her endless rebirths. Her maid, Nancy, carefully did her hair and makeup, and as if unintentionally, casually brought up her fiancé Dullan. Although young Master Dullan stutters a bit and is timid and gloomy, he still has his charms. Those words were too grating. Crane never liked hearing them. Then why don't you marry him in my place? Or how about you give me your lover? In the next moment, Nancy looked troubled, forcing a laugh and changing the subject. Of course, Crane was joking. After all, she had once coveted Nancy's lover in an attempt to escape the loop, and ended up getting killed by her. Crane silently prayed that Nancy wouldn't kill her this time. Then, she had to once again meet with that lowly fiancé of hers. No matter how you looked at it, there was no reason for the protagonist, Crane, to fall in love with Dullan. Although he wasn't her husband yet, showing up to his fiancé's coming-of-age ceremony in rain-drenched clothes was far too disrespectful. Crane had tried to understand and love him, but it was completely impossible. The same guests, the same music, and the same ceremony. She felt like she was in hell. Her fiancé even condescendingly advised her to accept reality, but before he could finish a single sentence, Crane could recite his next lines by heart. Accept reality, Crane Hire. This is your destiny. Is that what you were going to say? Dullan stubbornly denied it, but it was the absolute truth. The 69th time dancing with Dullan, the 45th time a couple stepped on each other, the 78th time a servant dropped a glass. Noisy chatter erupted all around. All because she had a fiancé like him. Crane Hire was being pitied for the 100th time. Seeing the man before her about to lose his temper over the gossip, Crane frowned in disgust at the familiar scene. But in the next second, it occurred to her that there was one thing she had never done before. She grabbed Dullan's hand and pulled him out of the ballroom. In response to his questioning, she smiled dazzlingly. He was her fiancé. What else would she do to him? Hold the wedding ahead of schedule, of course. This was a milestone moment, unique to Crane. As long as it was something she hadn't done before, she was willing to try it. As long as it was something happening for the first time, she could accept it. So, next, you're going to take off your clothes. After certain indescribable events had concluded, the atmosphere fell into a strange silence. When they returned to the ballroom, the noisy chatter was still ongoing. Crane quietly waited for Dullan to have his outburst, but to her surprise, he extended a hand, asking her to dance. Every move he made would draw ridicule from the nobles, yet he endured it. What was happening? Until, just like all the times before, they once again bumped into a servant carrying drinks. Crane watched numbly. As expected, what was meant to happen, happened. She held out her hand to Dullan, waiting for the brutish act of humiliation that was sure to follow. But unexpectedly, his face was grim and his expression unreadable. He didn't curse at the servant. Instead, he took her hand in his. You still want to dance, right? Crane looked at him, astonished. This was too strange. The Dullan who hadn't changed in 99 lifetimes had actually changed. In that instant, a glimmer of hope ignited in Crane. Could other things change as well? After the party, Crane returned to her room and carefully recalled the patterns of her rebirths. For instance, starting from her appearance in the rainy courtyard, her lifespan was 1 year. And after 1 year, she would inevitably die and return to the beginning. Another example, at the start of each new life, there was always a coin with a number engraved on it in her mouth. She had tried to defy the plot by deliberately gaining weight and making herself ugly. She even tried ending her own life, but still, nothing changed. In her 48th life, she was wounded by a wild boar's tusks. Dullan refused to get her medical treatment, using her broken engagement as an excuse. Her body became covered in bed sores, and even the maids were unwilling to touch her. Only the male lead, Raymond, would visit and care for her diligently. But in the end, she still died from sepsis. Her 18th life. The wealthy young lady Isella, resentful that she had seduced Raymond, didn't kill her directly. Instead, she doused her in kerosene, and Crane eventually died from complications of her burns. Her 53rd life. On the day of her wedding to Raymond, Isella's father suddenly appeared. To avenge his beloved daughter, he hacked at her neck with a dull, unsharpened axe. She had once resolved to take revenge on those who killed her in the next life. But with every new beginning, her heart would soften again. After all, they hadn't done anything yet in the new timeline. What reason did she have to punish them? Besides, it wasn't just them. In every life, countless people wanted to kill her. How could she even think about revenge? Watching the coin spin on the floor, Crane suddenly realized she shouldn't be so absolute. Although they had no memory of killing her, she remembered clearly how she died at their hands. It didn't matter if the list of people to take revenge on was endless. She could be reborn forever. She had all the time in the world. Such infinite time was perfectly suited for doing bad things. The reason she'd never had this thought until now was because of Raymond's appearance, which made her believe that love could change a person, change the world. But the facts proved her wrong. It was never love that could change others and herself. It was death. In that moment, it was as if everything clicked for Crane. Perhaps before her 117th birthday arrived, becoming a murderous young lady wouldn't be so bad. Meanwhile, on another road, because the carriage horse was injured, Isella had to follow her father, walking towards the higher estate. Looking at the higher territory, although sparsely populated, the profits from its orchards and logging areas were excellent. He had long wanted to seize this land for himself and make his daughter the new lord. And Isella, wanting the approval of her fiancé Raymond, was naturally thrilled with her father's plan. After arriving at their destination, Isella listened to her father exchange pleasantries, while secretly sizing up the Church of the Lord. But her eyes were drawn to a dense crowd. She pushed forward to get a better look, and was surprised to see a woman sitting alone inside the church. Despite the dilapidated surroundings, she shone like an angel. Hearing someone call her Milady, Isella was taken aback. This woman was actually the daughter of Lord Hire. For some reason, even though she wore a faded, graying dress, and not a single decent piece of jewelry, why did she feel so insanely jealous of this woman? But even so, Isella knew clearly that this noble lady was nothing more than a stepping stone for her. So she walked up and introduced herself. Crane looked at her with a calm gaze, and generously introduced her fiancé, Dylan. Isella felt a flicker of comfort as she looked at the stuttering man. No matter how beautiful she is, she still has to marry a poor priest like him. Her gaze held a trace of pity. You two are a perfect match. Even if you don't click right away, I'm sure you'll be very happy later on. Unexpectedly, having been provoked by her 100 times, Crane was used to it and thanked her politely with a smile. It's just that looking at Isella, wearing such a magnificent dress to church, a distant bell began to toll in Crane's mind. If I were to hang her, would she draw as much attention as a clock? Or would she make a sound as pleasant as a clock's chime? Miss Hire, you seem to be staring at my neck. Isella's voice suddenly brought her back to her senses. Isella had mistakenly thought she was admiring her necklace and showed it off, claiming it was a gift from her fiancé. Dylan glanced at Crane beside him with displeasure. Crane just smiled and praised it profusely. That truly is a beautiful noose. The next morning, Isella was frantic over her missing necklace. Nancy was helpless with the spoiled young lady. If it was really gone, there was nothing she could do. You should wash up first. It's almost time for breakfast. But the moment she finished speaking, Isella's slap followed. You stole it, didn't you? Isella's eyes were filled with rage, but Nancy provocatively pointed to her own cheek, an act that only fueled her anger. Just then, Crane suddenly appeared. Isella impatiently explained how the necklace had disappeared, and loudly voiced her suspicion. Your maid must have stolen it. The next second, Nancy was clutching her cheek pitifully, crying that she was framed, all her earlier contempt gone. Crane sighed helplessly, saying she would have people search for it again. Isella wanted to press the issue, but the stares of the servants behind Crane made her complaints die in her throat. By the way, Isella, you need to know one thing. Nancy has been by my side for a long time. One should consider the master before hitting their dog for the rest of the day. The servants of the entire estate searched for Isella's necklace. Isella paced anxiously in her father's room. She had to search the Lord's daughter's room. That necklace was a gift from Raymond. Verdi understood his daughter's anxiety. After all, the second son of a fallen baronial family had become a war hero. He could have married into a much more prominent family, but for certain reasons, he was indebted to them. So Verdi was sure Raymond wouldn't abandon Isella. Isella found no solution from her father, and could only trudge back to her own room, determined to leave this hellish place as soon as she found the necklace. But in the instant she pushed open the door, the floor was eerily covered in a black liquid, and the necklace that had been missing all day was gleaming faintly on the bed. Isella hurried over, but froze when she saw clearly what was on the bed. Resting on top of her necklace was a woman's head. In an instant, Isella broke out in a cold sweat. The next moment, she fled the room. The woman's head was Nancy's. She couldn't understand what had gone wrong. Was it just because she had gotten angry at her? How could she be dead? Fleeing in a panic, Isella tripped on her dress. Did I drive that maid to her death? Just then, that infuriating female voice sounded beside her ear. Isella looked up with hatred. Why did she have to run into her at this very moment? Because she had hit that maid. And the body was in her room. She would undoubtedly be seen as the murderer if discovered. And as the footsteps drew closer, Crane looked at the woman on the ground in surprise. The next second, a gentle smile touched her lips. What's wrong, Isella? What happened in the middle of the night? Crane recalled her earlier conversation with Nancy. After waking up from her 100th death, Nancy had looked strangely at the coin in her hand. You know fortune-telling? Should we make a bet? If it's heads, you have to be a good person. If it lands on the back? Before she could finish, Crane had already tossed the coin high into the air. As fate would have it, she decided to be a bad person from now on. That very afternoon, while the servants of Higher Manor were searching for Isella's necklace, they had seen their young lady appear in the courtyard. It was the first time they had seen it in many years. Their lady's smile, so dazzling and unforgettable. And that was because Crane had successfully killed her first person. Isella trembled as she looked at Crane, terrified she would be accused of murder. But her dress, stained with blood, caught Crane's attention. Isella panicked, trying to explain. But when she saw her blood-covered hands, she realized with despair that anyone would think she killed the maid. But then, the Crane before her extended a hand. Come to my room. I'll help you keep your secret. You're on your period, aren't you? Isella looked suspiciously at the naive woman behind her. Perhaps if she confessed everything, Crane might actually help her. But just as she was about to explain, Crane spoke with sudden understanding. Did you perhaps see something terrifying? What was it? Was it a body? The moment she spoke, Isella's expression betrayed her. But Crane explained it away lightly. That's quite normal. Because ghosts occasionally appear in this old mansion, it's just some scary illusion. You'll get used to it. Crane's words gave Isella a sliver of comfort, and she even offered to walk Isella back to her room. But standing before the door again, Isella couldn't suppress her fear. Crane verbally comforted her, and was the first to open the door and walk inside. Surprisingly, the room was spotless. The gem necklace that had been missing all day was hanging safely on a hat. Only then did Isella finally breathe a sigh of relief. She must have felt guilty for hitting the maid, and had a hallucination. But Crane, behind her, seemed to be in a trance. The sudden silence made Isella feel strange, but when she turned to look, Crane's expression was utterly horrifying. Isella grabbed her shoulders and shouted her name, and thankfully she returned to normal the next instant. It's too late. I'll arrange for you to rest in the room next door for now. After Isella left, Crane frantically searched the room. Nancy, where on earth did you go? Just a short while ago, she was gently talking to Nancy, who was resting on her lap. Nancy had eaten the drugged food without any suspicion. Crane was delighted, and unexpectedly Nancy had thoughtfully requested a week off. In that case, no one will notice if you disappear during this time. The difficult part was that this was her first time killing someone in 100 years. She subconsciously hugged the head in her arms, wanting to choose an easier way for her to die. But the restless Nancy in her arms was still struggling feebly. Crane stopped hesitating and let her go. Since you don't like the easy way, I'll have to do it myself. Nancy's limp body fell heavily to the floor. She looked up abruptly, only to find that the necklace she had stolen was now right before her eyes. But she could only watch in despair as Crane took the necklace. You really haven't changed one bit. The next second, Nancy felt something tighten around her neck, and above her, Crane pulled a hair ribbon taut in her hands. To be fair, next time, you can be the one to kill me. So, Nancy was clearly dead then. She had felt it with her own hands. She wasn't breathing, wasn't moving. So why did Nancy disappear? Crane's original plan was to have Isella see the body again, so she would be scared witless right in front of her. What is this now? Utterly boring. After her outburst, Crane slumped to the floor, strengthless. She couldn't figure out who could have cleaned up the scene so quickly. In the less than half an hour, they were gone. Or was there another possibility? Could it be that killing Nancy was just a hallucination of her own? It was possible. After all, she had died 99 times. It would be strange if she wasn't insane. But this realization made Crane break down. No matter how mad she became, she wouldn't allow herself to be deceived by hallucinations. Crane clenched her fists in fury and punched the floor again and again to teach her pathetic self a lesson. Next time, after killing Nancy, she would stay in Isella's room the entire time. Or perhaps, she could experiment on someone else first. Dawn was breaking when Crane left the room. A passing servant noticed her, but his attention was drawn to her injured hand. Seeing the servant's rude gesture, Crane frowned impatiently and violently shook his hand off. Just then, Dullan suddenly appeared. He had seen the entire exchange, but he only stared intently at his fiancée's hand. Crane met his gaze, not wanting to show weakness. Does someone really need to be taught how to assert their claim? Then again, if he had that kind of courage, he would have been the male lead. Crane waved the servant away, but Dullen beside her suddenly spoke. You're quite protective of him. But Crane couldn't be bothered and pushed him away. The next moment, her outstretched hand was caught again. Provoked by 2 disrespectful acts in a row, Crane was getting annoyed. Unexpectedly, Dullen spoke shyly. You haven't treated your wound, have you? Dullen took her back to his room and skillfully applied medicine to her hand. When he felt her flinch from the pain, his movements became even gentler. It might leave a scar, he said, a hint of heartache in his voice. Crane secretly studied his expression, although it was a bit unexpected, as her relationship with Dullen changed in this life. Other things were also quietly changing. Perhaps she could push things further. She then leaned in close to Dullen, her eyes full of allure. I'm still beautiful though, right? His fiancée's sudden closeness made Dullen's face instantly flush red, his eyes darting about. As a partner in this new experience, Crane was willing to give him a generous reward. She gently lifted Dullen's hand to her lips, an undeniable invitation. Sure enough, the next moment, Dullen's large hand ran through her red hair. She would make this man completely and utterly obsessed with her, make him try to snatch her away from the male lead, Raymond. And then, one day, she would personally send him to his death. The next day, Isella was overjoyed with her recovered necklace, constantly showing it off to Crane, boasting about how expensive and precious it was. But what Isella didn't know was that no matter how many expensive dresses, necklaces, or jewels she owned, her fiancé would never agree to marry her. Getting no response to her boasting, Isella felt a bit foolish. It only made her feel more certain that Crane was just putting on an act, pretending to be aloof, when she'd surely never seen such fine things, engrossed in playing the piano. This thing is long outdated. Isella kindly offered to give her a piano, but was coldly refused. Isella was a bit confused. Yesterday, Crane had been so warm towards her, and even walked her back to her room. But speaking of which, she hadn't seen that maid at all today. Why didn't that maid from yesterday come? Hearing this, Crane thought she was about to cause trouble again. Didn't I tell you I saw something terrifying yesterday? I saw that maid beheaded. Luckily, just as you said, it was a hallucination. Crane could no longer hear Isella's endless chatter. She kept replaying the events of that afternoon in her mind. She was certain she hadn't cut off Nancy's head. When Nancy died, there were only bruises on her neck from being strangled. So who did it? After Nancy's death, Crane promoted a laundry maid named Donna to be her personal attendant. Unexpectedly, the stable hand who had liked Nancy in the previous life fell for Donna after Nancy disappeared. Donna was different from the quiet and pensive Nancy. She was always chattering away at Crane's side. Crane had thought all maids were more or less the same, that replacing one wouldn't make much of a difference. But unexpectedly, it was these insignificant characters who could bring about massive changes to the plot. While Crane was helping Donna pick out clothes, Donna casually picked up a scarf and said she wanted to give it to a Mrs. Dell. The name, one Crane had never heard before, put her on alert. But Donna thought she was joking. "Milady, that's Mrs. Dell, don't you remember? She was your tutor for 8 years. But Crane was certain that in the past 100 years, she had never heard that name. But now, every one of these seemingly irrelevant matters and people, every trivial detail, was incredibly important to her. Perhaps through them, she could be saved. Just like that, she suddenly felt a sense of anticipation. What changes would Mrs. Dell bring? Because of Donna's suggestion, the orchestra concert that Nancy had accompanied her to in the last life was changed to a circus performance. The acrobats were constantly leaping through the air, spinning. It reminded Crane of herself. Once upon a time, she had also taken such a leap. But tragically, no one had ever been there to catch her hand. Everyone just let her fall, over and over again, until a giant creature's sudden appearance interrupted her thoughts. This was the first time Crane had ever seen an elephant. But then, the elephant made a mistake, and the trainer grabbed a whip and began to flog it mercilessly. Crane watched the scene coldly. In that moment, it was as if she were that elephant. Fate, like this audience, derived pleasure from her suffering. Crane threw down her wine glass. The already stressed elephant was especially sensitive to unusual sounds. Crane then tucked her red hair behind her ear, deliberately exposing a sparkling earring to catch the light. As expected, her earring caught the elephant's attention. If it could perform such complex tricks, it meant the elephant was intelligent and sharp. Therefore, it should be able to sense human malice. The next moment, the rampaging elephant charged into the crowd. The scene instantly descended into chaos, and Crane watched, as if possessed. Right now, she was that elephant. She would kill everyone who had shackled her and reclaim her freedom, even if it cost her her own life. After all, she could never escape this curse of endless rebirth. Just as the elephant's front legs were about to crush them, there was a loud bang. The elephant's massive body crashed to the ground. Crane wasn't the least bit curious about who killed the elephant. After all, a minor character would never have the chance to be the hero in a situation like this. Seeing a fleeting figure flash past the doorway, Crane already understood. He was here. The blonde demon known as the Magic Marksman, who was also the male lead of this novel, her lover of 100 years. Although he didn't know her name yet, no matter how the plot changed, Raymond would always fall in love with Crane. The fated lover she'd been entangled with for a century had appeared. Crane instinctively turned to flee. Because according to the novel's plot, the moment Raymond appeared before her, everything would start moving toward the novel's final ending. This also meant that she was about to die and be reborn once again. So before the changes she had made could fade away, she had to find Mrs. Dell, who hadn't appeared in 100 years. She was certain she could provide her with a new lead. Crane arrived at a familiar dark alley. Passing through it would lead her to Mrs. Dell's home. But unfortunately, she had also met with disaster here once before. That was before she met Raymond. And the end result was that she was saved by him. From there, their love story unfolded uncontrollably. But since Raymond had already appeared this time, she could only gamble that perhaps the plot had already changed. However, the familiar large hands appeared once more. A pair of vagrants blocked her path. Crane's face was filled with disgust. She reached out and swatted away the greasy fingers on her cheek. She had already met Raymond, so why couldn't she escape this? Was it because of her own rash actions this time? Just then, one of the men recognized her as the Lord's daughter and violently grabbed her hand. The other man rudely began searching her for a coin purse. It was too late for Crane to have regrets. The empty purse angered the man even more, and he crudely snatched the hairpin from her head. The plot, identical to before, left Crane somewhat disappointed. It seemed this life would still see no changes. Rather than be toyed with by fate, she might as well take the initiative. In a voice devoid of emotion, she called out one of the men's names, and accurately recounted how he abused his wife. So even if you give the hairpin to your wife, she'll only wish you were dead. Unexpectedly, her taunts thoroughly enraged the man, and a slap landed squarely on her face. But she didn't stop there. She softly called out the other man's name. After you die, your son will come to my house to wash dishes. But don't you worry, because he'll soon catch a disease and follow you to the grave. Watching the man lose control and pull out a dagger, Crane stared at them coldly, unable to stop herself from wondering, will I be saved by Raymond again now that I'm in danger? He's the male lead after all. But Crane didn't want that. So she took a step forward, meeting the dagger head-on, and sternly urged the man to hurry up and do it. If he didn't act soon, it would be time for Raymond to appear. In the next moment, the dagger at her neck was suddenly plunged into her abdomen. The man's unexpected action threw Crane into doubt. Had she miscalculated the time of Raymond's arrival? By swapping Nancy with Donna, it had become difficult for her to calculate the timing as precisely as before. A sharp pain shot from the wound in her abdomen, and Crane finally felt fear. Even after dying so many times, she could never get used to the pain. Driven by fear, she subconsciously whispered Raymond's name. Unexpectedly, a large hand suddenly covered her mouth. The man, deciding to go all the way, intended to kill her outright. At that critical moment, the familiar sound of a gunshot rang out again. After 2 consecutive shots, Crane collapsed to the ground, clutching her bleeding wound. The situation was almost laughable. She had run out here to avoid him, yet now she was hoping he would come and save her. "Are you all right?" Raymond's voice was like warm sunlight, piercing through to her heart. Raymond would fall in love with Crane at first sight. That was one thing that had never changed in 100 years, so today was no exception. Raymond fell in love with Crane. Just moments ago, Raymond had been hiding in the shadows, watching impassively as Crane was assaulted. It wasn't until she lost control and cried out his name that he calmly raised his gun and took aim. The long-waiting attendant saw his young master appear, holding an injured woman in his arms. He followed orders to fetch gauze and water to treat the woman, but he couldn't help but feel suspicious. His young master, Raymond Sayester, had once single-handedly taken down 300 enemy soldiers, and was known as a hero of the kingdom. People used to believe he had made a pact with a vile demon, giving him the title Magic Marksman as a form of mockery. But now, when people mentioned that title, it was only with reverence and envy. No matter how you looked at it, you couldn't associate that fearsome title with him. He even took care of his comrades and subordinates personally. If that was the case, then why did he allow this lady to be injured? No one in this backwater town was a match for him, unless he did it on purpose. In the carriage, Crane lay on her side, her head on Raymond's lap. Strangely, no one else in the carriage found this odd, as if they were naturally meant to be this way. It was only after their lady introduced the man's identity that they learned he was Acella's fiancé. Seeing their deeply disappointed expressions, Crane couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Unexpectedly, the laugh tugged at the wound on her abdomen. Raymond explained coolly, "Her wound isn't deep," but this earned him a hostile look from Donna. "It's true that it's not life-threatening, but since there's a wound, there's bound to be pain. So you think being stabbed is no big deal, is that it?" Only then did Raymond realize his mistake. He wasn't being sarcastic. He just wanted to keep everyone from worrying too much. However, while she wasn't dying, Crane didn't feel she was in great shape either. The carriage suddenly fell silent, with only Donna crouching and crying, blaming herself. Raymond observed Crane's expression. "Did you have a good time on your outing today?" His tone held a hint of imperceptible familiarity, but Crane looked at the man in horror. She had just been stabbed. Perhaps her stare was too direct. Raymond turned his head and apologized in a low voice, saying he was clumsy with words and not good at comforting people. Crane didn't even have the energy to be angry. Unexpectedly, he spoke again. "Then you probably won't want to go out for the next 10 years, will you?" Although it was a bit ridiculous to say this to someone who relived the same year over and over, she actually quite liked going out, because she had seen an elephant for the first time in her life. She never imagined such a massive and beautiful animal existed in the world. It made her feel wonderful and happy. Raymond seemed a bit surprised to hear this, but after hearing her say she was happy, he replied in a low voice, "That's good then." But hearing her lady talk about the elephant only made Donna blame herself more. "If I hadn't insisted on going to see it, how would you have gotten hurt, milady? If Lord Raymond hadn't saved you, the consequences would have been unimaginable. So perhaps this is fate." Crane watched her coldly as she finished speaking. "See? The characters in the book so naturally accepted this meticulously planned romantic drama. But she was determined to ruin this play with her own hands. She broke free from Donna's hands and reached out to pull the two of them closer. "Donna, if it's really as you say, then fate has been far too cruel to me. After all, I nearly died twice today, wouldn't you agree, Raymond?" This man who had descended like fate to save her twice. Unexpectedly, the man before her shed his previously clumsy-tongued image. The moonlight outside blurred his expression. Even after experiencing such terrible things, you don't show the slightest bit of fear. Upon hearing that Raymond had escorted Crane home, Isella could no longer control her emotions. She made things difficult for the servants of the higher mansion in every possible way, to the point where even her own father couldn't stand it. Verdi comforted his daughter. "A noble marriage is a transaction. You two can cultivate love after you're married. Besides, no matter how beautiful Crane Hire is Raymond really going to break off his engagement to marry someone else's fiancé? What an utterly absurd notion." However, what concerned him more was that his daughter had become far too emotional since arriving at this mansion. Isella couldn't help but recall that nightmare again, and she truthfully told her father her suspicions. Ever since that nightmare, she had never seen that maid again. So she suspected that everything that happened that night might have been real. Meanwhile, Crane patiently listened to the head maid's scolding. She complained that her lady had shaken off the servants, left alone, and gotten injured. At Crane's repeated pleading, the head maid finally gave up the idea of firing Donna, but her constant lecturing began to annoy Crane. But if the head maid, who was in charge of household affairs, were to disappear, she would lose a great deal of freedom. So she was willing to act spoiled around the servants when appropriate, to make them feel that they were special. It was just that the Raymond she saw yesterday felt a bit strange. Just then, the head maid's complaining voice continued unabated. "Because of Nancy's departure, we're short-staffed now." Crane subconsciously asked where Nancy had gone. "You don't know yet?" Nancy said she couldn't continue this work and resigned. To welcome Raymond's arrival, the Lord specially prepared a lavish banquet. Seeing Raymond acting as gentlemanly and courteous as ever, Crane was secretly relieved. She had clearly been overthinking things. It must be because she had been too sensitive lately, that she found him somewhat aggressive that day. Even Isella across from her was dressed as ostentatiously as ever, like a proud peacock showing off her shallow knowledge, although she desperately wanted to present the image of a future baroness. Crane's gaze fell on the silent Raymond to the side. As a nobleman, Raymond valued morals and honor more than a merchant's calculations of profit and loss. Unfortunately, that was something the father-daughter pair sorely lacked. Only the Lord offered supportive applause and praise. Isella was smugly pleased with herself when she looked expectantly at her fiancé. She received only a cold response. The scene instantly became awkward. Crane thought for a moment and then suddenly spoke up. "All in all, Mrs. Ella must have been moved by how splendid the dinner is. I'm so happy to see you enjoying this meal so much." Her elegance and grace, however, only made Isella's earlier remarks seem more like a show of talent. To ease his daughter's embarrassment, Verdi explained on Isella's behalf, feigning distress. "Actually, my daughter has had a lot on her mind recently. I hear a maid has offended her." The Lord immediately understood what he was referring to. "You mean Nancy, don't you? She has already submitted her resignation." Despite Isella's look of disbelief, the Lord firmly stated that Nancy had come to him personally to submit her resignation. Beside them, Crane's beautiful pupils contracted upon hearing this. She had killed Nancy, so who was it that her father saw? Crane suppressed the doubt in her heart, took a breath, and spoke again. She left without even a word to me. It's truly heartbreaking. The Lord, his expression unchanged, offered comfort. People who wander are all like that. Hearing the Lord's explanation, Verdi told his daughter not to dwell on it. By now, the banquet was halfway through, and the Lord stood up to suggest they all take a short break. Back in her room, Isella felt utterly defeated. Her knowledge and wealth were worthless in the face of Crane's beauty. Although her father had said love could be cultivated after marriage, even her own father preferred his younger, more beautiful mistress over her mother. But what saddened her even more was seeing her mother's intimacy with the butler. Was the true love she yearned for just a pipe dream? She knew Raymond had never loved her, not since the first time they met. But she didn't care, because she believed she had the power to make everything end perfectly. She had thought Raymond was different, but even so, he had no choice but to marry her. After all, he had been sold to the Elven family. After a short rest, Isella prepared to return to the dining hall. But unexpectedly, she heard that familiar woman's voice coming from the mansion's balcony. Bathed in moonlight, Raymond noticed Isella approaching, yet he continued to flirt with the woman across from him. Just half an hour earlier, the Lord had suggested a break and left with Verdi. Crane had wanted to follow, but with so many people around, it was inconvenient to speak up, so she had to give up. She was still very curious about who her father had gone to see. Unexpectedly, while she was lost in thought, Raymond's gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. "What are you thinking about?" If life were a dream, Raymond would undoubtedly be her ultimate nightmare. Yet right now, this nightmare was insisting on dragging her down with him. "Are you unhappy to see me? There was a noble lady who once went all the way to the battlefield to be a volunteer nurse just for me." Raymond's sudden warmth left Crane baffled. "Have you forgotten about your fiancé?" However, Raymond didn't answer her question. Instead, he took her hand, his gaze exceptionally gentle. The flames of jealousy burning behind her were impossible for Crane to ignore. If this continued, Isella would be dousing her with kerosene again, knowing his fiancé was just on the other side of the wall. Raymond still didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he suddenly recommended himself as a good candidate for a husband. If Crane wanted revenge on Isella's family, obtaining him would be the most advantageous choice. Besides, you've known me for a long time. Such a certain statement left Crane stunned, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. She denied that she wanted to use his reputation as a war hero. But Raymond quickly saw through her lie. A suspicion formed in Crane's mind, but she dared not believe it. Because in every past life she had asked Raymond if he remembered her. She had even demanded how he could forget her. But every time Raymond said he didn't remember. So this time, she didn't ask, and she no longer believed. Crane composed herself, stepped forward, and engaged him. "Are you trying to say I'm seducing you?" Raymond hadn't forgotten the image of Crane crying out his name in desperation yesterday. "Weren't you planning to seduce me from that moment on?" She had indeed been overthinking. Crane didn't deny it, playing along with his words. She was just a little curious about him, that's why. Unexpectedly, Raymond's downcast eyes held an emotion she couldn't decipher. Then, he closed in on her step by step. "You seem to know me very well. I read your lips, and you weren't surprised at all. Usually, people marvel at my marksmanship. But not only were you not amazed, you didn't doubt it for a second. Yet your expression was far from one of adoration." Raymond's gaze was as deep as the sea, his every question a probe, as if trying to dissect her very soul. Crane couldn't help but wonder if this was still the knight who had loved her. Just then, a scar-covered hand tightly gripped Raymond's wrist. Dullen's gloomy face held a trace of anger. What are you doing to my fiancé?" Raymond covertly sized up the man beside him, and finally released his hand with a soft apology. The next moment, Dullen took his fiancé's hand and was about to leave. But Crane looked back in confusion. In every life, when they met, he had never doubted her. If only he had changed sooner, perhaps they... Until Dullen beside her called her name with dissatisfaction. All in all, Dullen being willing to get close to her was a good thing, because it would make it easier for her to make her move. But if Raymond was starting to suspect her, it would be very difficult for her to kill him. But Crane firmly believed that Raymond's death must have a special meaning. If she killed the male lead of a romance novel, maybe she could find the answer to her endless rebirths. And she wanted to know even more when faced with the brink of death. Would Raymond still love her as he had before? The despicable priest, Dullen. He worshipped his unwed wife as a goddess, not only condoning all the sins she committed, but also seeking a way for her to atone. So he scoured the scriptures, page 184. A sinner may offer a sacrifice of atonement for unintentional sins. Those who covet others' possessions shall make an offering of blood. A thief shall offer a lamb, and the promiscuous shall offer 3 heifers. And as for a murderer, the next second, the sacred scripture was torn out. His goddess would not need to pay any price, because she would remain as pure and flawless as she was in the beginning. Elsewhere, Isella was still brooding over Nancy's disappearance. But the Lord had already given a clear answer at the banquet. Her father told her not to dwell on the matter any longer, and to focus on preparing for her engagement ceremony with Raymond. Besides, even if the Lord and his family had killed Nancy, what did it matter? Verdi was annoyed that he couldn't drive the Lord's family away, and didn't want to hear his daughter make a fuss over trivial things. He knew his daughter was jealous of Crane higher, but as long as nothing happened to his daughter, Raymond would still marry her. After all, breaking an engagement is a disgraceful affair. He recalled his daughter's deliberate showing off at the banquet. While a noble lady needs a certain level of cultural refinement, useless knowledge will only be your ruin. Her father's criticism sent Isella plummeting into despair. It was her father who had always wanted her to become a knowledgeable person. Ignoring her father's calls from behind her, Isella numbly returned to her room. Just looking at the identical rooms and furniture in this mansion filled her with an inexplicable disgust. The haggard reflection of herself in the mirror pained her even more. No matter what, she could never compare to Crane. But regardless, Raymond would still marry her. The gorgeous clothes that filled her wardrobe brought her a sliver of comfort. Once she was engaged to Raymond, Crane would have to spend the rest of her life cooped up in the higher territory, while she and Raymond would thrive in high society. As for the life or death of that maid, it had nothing to do with her. In the dim room, Crane held a saw, carefully measuring with it. She had thought it over carefully. If what her father said was true, then the body in this room would remain here. But if her father had really disposed of Nancy's body, then this one would also disappear without a trace, right? The trouble was, she hadn't seen how Nancy was dismembered. Facing the man's corpse, her hands felt inexperienced. Would her handiwork even be recognized? Moreover, she had unexpectedly found a lock of Nancy's hair in the room's fireplace. It seemed this time it would be cleaned up just like before. To verify her thoughts, she decided to secretly set a trap. Isella, suffering from a sleepless night, wanted to ask Dullen for some sleeping medicine, but she hesitated outside his door for a long time, not daring to knock. However, the door before her suddenly opened the next moment. Dullen stammered as he asked what she wanted. After Isella explained her reason, he turned to get the sleeping medicine. Looking at his meek and submissive back, Isella fumed. If Dullen weren't so pathetic, Crane would have married him long ago. Then it wouldn't have affected her relationship with Raymond, but she couldn't rely on this guy at all. The paper bag Dullen handed her contained the same tea Crane always drank. But why would someone as calm and composed as her need this? Hearing this, Dullen lowered his eyes. It's probably to help her stay a bit calmer. With his words being unclear, Isella didn't notice that Dullen hadn't stuttered at all. Then, Dullen took a step forward, looking down at the woman before him. "Miss Isella, please stop meddling in other people's affairs." A strange chill ran down her spine. Isella angrily rebuked him for his insolence and turned to leave. Not long after she left, there was a sudden knock at the door. Dullen turned and asked the attendant what the matter was. The attendant entered, bowed respectfully, and then reported, "It's about Miss Crane." After waiting all night, Crane discovered that the body had indeed been cleaned up again the next day. Crane stared in amazement at the spotless room. Nancy's hair was gone too. Luckily, she had set a trap beforehand. The lock of the man's hair she had hidden hadn't disappeared, proving this wasn't her imagination. So, her father had indeed been lying. Crane was a little disappointed that she had seen through this setup so easily. But since the person who removed the body was her father, she now knew how the body had disappeared, if she thought about it carefully. Around 3:30 that afternoon, she had moved Nancy to Isella's room. Everything was in place by 4 o'clock, although there was plenty of time between then and nightfall. For the person to cut off Nancy's head, maids were constantly passing through the hallway during that time. And Isella discovered the body at exactly 10 o'clock. It took Crane 10 minutes to comfort her and change her clothes. In such a short amount of time, it would have been impossible for the person to quickly clean up the body and tidy the room. And at that exact moment, she was panicking because the body had vanished. If she simplified things, the answer became clear. Isella had entered a different room before running into her, and Nancy's hair had been left in Isella's actual room. It seems that after Crane left, someone moved the body to the adjacent room. Unexpectedly, because all the rooms in the mansion were decorated identically, Isella had mistakenly walked into the neighboring room, which caused this whole mess. This narrowed down the list of suspects considerably. Someone strong enough to dismember Nancy in a short time and familiar with the mansion's layout. Crane had an answer in her mind, but she was still puzzled. She was the one who killed them, so why did that person take it upon themselves to clean up the mess, as if they had anticipated this would happen? And what exactly did her father know? Half a month later, Verdi used the territory's business and Crane's injury as an excuse to incite the people of the domain to hold a large-scale festival, and Crane had to prepare for the hunting work this entailed. Although the hunters did the hunting, as the Lord's daughter, she also had tasks to perform. But Crane had been wanting to see her father. But the leadership had too much to do, and her father rarely had time alone. Watching Isella put on a high-pitched voice and feign innocence to praise the white horse in front of her, Crane looked up at the sky, speechless, from behind her. Unsurprisingly, she saw Raymond nearby. Rather than looking his handsome profile, Crane found it more amusing to watch Isella act like a love-struck fool, and she was also curious to see what that face would look like later. Just then, Raymond noticed their presence and gave a polite nod. Unexpectedly, Isella tried even harder, distractedly asking Crane all sorts of questions. Seeing Isella wander further away with her incoherent words, Raymond finally took the bait and answered her question. Miss Isella seems very interested in horses. Yes, I love horses. I've had a talent for riding since I was a child. Seeing Isella get what she wanted, Crane didn't stay any longer, secretly praying that Isella would perform well this time. After leaving, Crane went to check the number of animal traps, then turned to get into the carriage to leave. She subconsciously reached out her hand, waiting for someone to help her up. But she forgot that in this life, Raymond had no relationship with her yet. Although there had been times when she didn't marry Raymond, this was the first time he hadn't helped her into the carriage. But she didn't need it now. Crane tentatively stepped onto the footplate. Unexpectedly, a dramatic scene straight out of a novel occurred. An accidental slip of the foot caused her to lose her balance and fall backward. And at that very moment, the fated male lead suddenly appeared. Are you all right? Crane stared at the Raymond's handsome face, momentarily dazed, but soon snapped out of it and escaped from his arms. Raymond muttered an apology for his rudeness and effortlessly lifted her up. After settling in, Crane politely said thank you, expecting him to leave. But the next second, Raymond naturally sat down in the carriage. What's going on? Where's your fiancée? Aren't you going to ride with her? Hearing this, Raymond seemed a bit helpless. I can't ride a horse. The blatant lie made Crane's face darken. How could he serve in the military if he couldn't ride a horse? Realizing Raymond was just messing with her, Crane feigned ignorance and laughed it off. But the current Raymond always gave her a strange feeling. Normally at this point, he would be more shy, his eyes always filled with love when he looked at her. But now, she could never figure out what Raymond was thinking. The weather is so nice. Raymond's sudden remark interrupted her thoughts. It was only then that Crane realized summer had arrived unnoticed. Raymond hated winter the most. The wars he fought in were neither for honor nor did they affect the lives of the people. The rich only used it as an opportunity to profit from war. And Verdi in particular made a fortune selling weapons. The nobles, meanwhile, gambled on the outcomes of the war, and their playing cards were the soldiers pushed onto the battlefield. Afterwards, Raymond would always reminisce with her about that war, about the endless white expanse that always made him want to add a splash of color with blood. And that was why he was always drawn to Crane's red hair. Raymond hoped the soldiers would not die meaningless deaths. He hoped for the kindness of people, and the forgiveness of his enemies. They say the winters in the White Mountains are bitterly cold. It's thanks to the nights that we can live so peacefully. Thank you. Crane used this piece of their shared past, trying to dispel Raymond's suspicions about her, but she also knew that even this would have little effect. In any case, she could no longer trust Raymond's goodwill from now on. And he probably felt the same way. Just then, Raymond suddenly mentioned, I heard you're sponsoring the son of a death row inmate? She didn't know where he'd heard it, but she was indeed sponsoring the child, but only to buy his father's corpse. Raymond didn't understand why she would spend a huge sum of gold on the son of a condemned man. Unexpectedly, Crane looked at him with a sincere gaze the next moment. Because of love, I want to overcome malice with forgiveness. She painstakingly crafted the image of a beautiful young woman, full of love, with a good family and background. Just like before, when they first fell in love, just the way he liked. He had even sworn, I will remember you in my next life. But reality, her gaze was so intense that it drew Raymond's attention. Crane immediately turned her head and said no more. She had long since given up trying to find answers from him. Now, she would still pretend to be that girl from all those years ago, but only to send him to his grave. It didn't matter how small the trap was, as long as it could trip him up.